Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, with Summaries. Book 1, Chapter 1. Every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit, is thought to aim at some good, and for this reason the good has rightly been declared to be that at which all things aim. But a certain difference is found among ends. Some are activities, others are products apart from the activities that produce them. Where there are ends apart from the actions, it is the nature of the products to be better than the activities. Now, as there are many actions, arts, and sciences, their ends also are many. The end of the medical art is health, that of shipbuilding a vessel, that of strategy victory, that of economics wealth. It makes no difference whether the activities themselves are the ends of the actions, or something else apart from the activities, as in the case of the sciences just mentioned. Summary. In this opening chapter, Aristotle starts by explaining that everything people do, whether it's a skill like painting, a study like science, or any action like helping a friend, has a purpose, and that purpose is always something good. He says that all human efforts aim at achieving some kind of good, which he sees as the ultimate goal of life. However, not all goals are the same. Some goals are the activities themselves, like playing music for the joy of it, while others are products, like building a ship. Aristotle notes that when the goal is a product, it's usually valued more than the process of making it. For example, a finished ship is more important than the act of building it. He gives examples of different fields. Medicine aims for health, shipbuilding for a ship, military strategy for victory, and economics for wealth. These fields often work together, with smaller skills like making bridles for horses serving bigger ones like riding, which itself serves military strategy. The goals of these master arts are more important because they are the reason the smaller tasks exist. Aristotle sets the stage for his bigger question: what is the highest good that all these efforts ultimately aim for? Book 1, Chapter 2. If then there is some end of the things we do, which we desire for its own sake, everything else being desired for the sake of this, and if we do not choose everything for the sake of something else, for at that rate the process would go on to infinity, so that our desire would be empty and vain, clearly this must be the good and the chief good. Will not the knowledge of it, then, have a great influence on life? Shall we not, like archers who have a mark to aim at, be more likely to hit upon what is right? If so, we must try, in outline at least, to determine what it is, and of which of the sciences or capacities it is the object. It would seem to belong to the most authoritative art, and that which is most truly the master art. And politics appears to be of this nature, for it is this that ordains which of the sciences should be studied in a state, and which each class of citizens should learn, and up to what point they should learn them. And we see even the most highly esteemed of capacities to fall under this, strategy, economics, rhetoric. Now, since politics uses the rest of the sciences, and since, again, it legislates as to what we are to do and what we are to abstain from, the end of this science must include those of the others, so that this end must be the good for man. For even if the end is the same for a single man and for a state, that of the state seems at all events something greater and more complete, whether to attain or to preserve. Though it is worth while to attain the end merely for one man, it is finer and more godlike to attain it for a nation or for city-states. These, then, are the ends at which our inquiry aims, since it is political science in one sense of that term. Summary. Aristotle builds on the idea that all actions aim at some good by suggesting there must be one ultimate good that we want for its own sake, not because it leads to something else. If we kept chasing goals that only lead to other goals, we'd never find satisfaction, like an endless chase with no finish line. He calls this ultimate good the chief good, which he hints is happiness, and says knowing it helps us live better, like an archer hitting a target more accurately with a clear aim. Aristotle argues that figuring out this chief good is the job of political science, which he sees as the most important field, because it decides what other skills and knowledge like military strategy, economics, or public speaking citizens should learn, and how they should act. Political science is like the boss of all other sciences, setting rules for what people should do or avoid to achieve the good life. While this good applies to individuals, it's even more significant when achieved for a whole community or city-state, as this is a grander, almost divine goal. Aristotle is setting up his exploration of what happiness really is, and how we can achieve it through the lens of political science. Book 1, Chapter 3. Our discussion will be adequate if it has as much clearness as the subject matter admits of, for precision is not to be sought for alike in all discussions, any more than in all the products of the crafts. Now fine and just actions, which political science investigates, admit of much variety and fluctuation of opinion, so that they may be thought to exist only by convention, and not by nature. And goods also give rise to a similar fluctuation, because they bring harm to many people. For before now men have been undone by reason of their wealth, and others by reason of their courage. We must be content, then, in speaking of such subjects and with such premises to indicate the truth roughly and in outline, and in speaking about things which are only for the most part true, and with premises of the same kind to reach conclusions that are no better. In the same spirit, therefore, should each type of statement be received, for it is the mark of an educated man to look for precision in each class of things just so far as the nature of the subject admits. It is evidently equally foolish to accept probable reasoning from a mathematician, and to demand from a rhetorician scientific proofs. Now, each man judges well the things he knows, and of these he is a good judge. And so the man who has been educated in a subject is a good judge of that subject, and the man who has received an all-round education is a good judge in general. Hence a young man is not a proper hearer of lectures on political science, for he is inexperienced in the actions that occur in life, but its discussions start from these and are about these. And further, since he tends to follow his passions, his study will be vain and unprofitable, because the end aimed at is not knowledge but action. And it makes no difference whether he is young in years or youthful in character. The defect does not depend on time but on his living, and pursuing each successive object as passion directs. For to such persons, as to the incontinent, knowledge brings no profit, but to those who desire and act in accordance with a rational principle knowledge about such matters will be of great benefit. These remarks about the student, the sort of treatment to be expected, and the purpose of the inquiry may be taken as our preface. Summary. Aristotle explains that when talking about political science, which focuses on noble and just actions, we shouldn't expect exact answers like in math, because human behavior and opinions about what's good or just vary a lot. Things like wealth or courage can sometimes lead to trouble, like someone being harmed because they're too rich or too brave, so these topics aren't black and white. He says it's okay to aim for a general understanding rather than precise details, as an educated person knows how much exactness a subject allows. For example, you wouldn't expect a public speaker to give scientific proofs or a mathematician to rely on guesses. He also says that young people, or those who act impulsively, aren't ready to study political science because it's about real-life actions, not just ideas, and requires experience and rational thinking. People who follow their emotions without control won't benefit from this knowledge, but those who think and act rationally will find it very useful. Aristotle is setting expectations for his discussion, emphasizing that it's about practical action, not just theoretical knowledge, and it requires a mature, thoughtful audience. Book 1, Chapter 4. Let us resume our inquiry and state, in view of the fact that all knowledge and every pursuit aims at some good, what it is that we say political science aims at, and what is the highest of all goods achievable by action. Verbally, there is very general agreement, for both the general run of men and people of superior refinement say that it is happiness, and identify living well and doing well with being happy. But with regard to what happiness is they differ, and the many do not give the same account as the wise. For the former think it is some plain and obvious thing, like pleasure, wealth, or honor. They differ, however, from one another, and often even the same man identifies it with different things, with health when he is ill, with wealth when he is poor. But conscious of their ignorance, they admire those who proclaim some great ideal that is above their comprehension. Now, some thought that apart from these many goods, there is another which is self-subsistent, and causes the goodness of all these as well. To examine all the opinions that have been held were perhaps somewhat fruitless, enough to examine those that are most prevalent or that seem to be arguable. Let us not fail to notice, however, that there is a difference between arguments from and those to the first principles. For Plato, too, was right in raising this question and asking, as he used to do, are we on the way from or to the first principles? There is a difference, as there is in a race course between the course from the judges to the turning point and the way back. For, while we must begin with what is known, things are objects of knowledge in two senses, some to us, some without qualification. Presumably, then, we must begin with things known to us. Hence, anyone who is to listen intelligently to lectures about what is noble and just, and generally about the subjects of political science, must have been brought up in good habits. For the fact is the starting point, and if this is sufficiently plain to him, he will not at the start need the reason as well. And the man who has been well brought up has or can easily get starting points. And as for him who neither has nor can get them, let him hear the words of Hesiod. Far best is he who knows all things himself. Good, he that hearkens when men counsel right. But he who neither knows, nor lays to heart another's wisdom, is a useless wight. Summary. Aristotle continues his exploration by asking what the ultimate goal of political science is, which he identifies as happiness, something everyone seems to agree on as the key to living well and acting well. However, people disagree on what happiness actually is. Ordinary folks think it's something simple like pleasure, money, or honor, and their ideas shift depending on their situation, like wanting health when sick or wealth when poor. Wiser people, though, see happiness as something deeper and harder to grasp. Aristotle notes that some philosophers, like Plato, believed in a single, perfect good that makes everything else good, but he thinks it's more practical to focus on the most common or reasonable ideas about happiness. He also explains that to study this topic well, you need to start with what you already know from experience and good habits, not just abstract theories. People raised with good morals already have a sense of what's right, making it easier to understand happiness. Those without this foundation, like the impulsive or uninformed, won't get much from this study, as it's about applying knowledge to real life, not just thinking about it. Book 1, Chapter 5. Let us, however, resume our discussion from the point at which we digressed. To judge from the lives that men lead, most men and men of the most vulgar type seem not without some ground to identify the good or happiness with pleasure, which is the reason why they love the life of enjoyment. For there are, we may say, three prominent types of life that just mentioned, the political and thirdly the contemplative life. Now the mass of mankind are evidently quite slavish in their tastes, preferring a life suitable to beasts, but they get some ground for their view, from the fact that many of those in high places share the tastes of Palace. A consideration of the prominent types of life shows that people of superior refinement and of active disposition identify happiness with honor, for this is, roughly speaking, the end of the political life. But it seems too superficial to be what we are looking for, since it is thought to depend on those who bestow honor rather than on him who receives it. But the good we divine to be something proper to a man and not easily taken from him. Further, men seem to pursue honor in order that they may be assured of their goodness. At least it is by men of practical wisdom that they seek to be honored, and among those who know them, and on the ground of their virtue. Clearly, then, according to them, at any rate, virtue is better. And perhaps one might even suppose this to be, rather than honor, the end of the political life. But even this appears somewhat incomplete, for possession of virtue seems actually compatible with being asleep, or with lifelong inactivity, and further, with the greatest sufferings and misfortunes. But a man who was living so no one would call happy, unless he were maintaining a thesis at all costs. But enough of this, for the subject has been sufficiently treated even in the current discussions. Third comes the contemplative life, which we shall consider later. The life of money-making is one undertaken under compulsion, and wealth is evidently not the good we are seeking, for it is merely useful and for the sake of something else. And so one might rather take the aforenamed objects to be ends, for they are loved for themselves. But it is evident that not even these are ends, yet many arguments have been thrown away in support of them. Let us leave this subject then. Summary. Aristotle looks at how different people live to figure out what they think happiness is, identifying three main lifestyles, one focused on pleasure, one on politics and honor, and one on contemplation, which he'll discuss later. Most people chase pleasure, living for enjoyment like animals, and even some powerful people, like the legendary King Palace, share this view, which gives it some appeal. More refined people, especially those involved in politics, see happiness as achieving honor, like being respected as a great leader. But Aristotle says honor isn't the true goal because it depends on others' opinions, not something you control yourself, and true happiness should be something you own and can't easily lose. He suggests that honor seekers really want to be seen as good, pointing to virtue as a better goal. However, even virtue alone isn't enough, because you can have virtue while doing nothing or suffering greatly, and no one would call that happiness. Wealth, another common pursuit, is just a tool, not the ultimate goal, since it's only useful for getting other things. Aristotle dismisses these incomplete ideas of happiness, setting the stage to explore the contemplative life as a possible path to the true good. Book 1, Chapter 6. We had perhaps better consider the universal good and discuss thoroughly what is meant by it, although such an inquiry is made an uphill one by the fact that the forms have been introduced by friends of our own. Yet it would perhaps be thought to be better, indeed to be our duty, for the sake of maintaining the truth, even to destroy what touches us closely, especially as we are philosophers or lovers of wisdom. For, while both are dear, piety requires us to honor truth above our friends. The men who introduced this doctrine did not posit ideas of classes within which they recognized priority and posteriority, which is the reason why they did not maintain the existence of an idea embracing all numbers. But the term good is used both in the category of substance and in that of quality, and in that of relation, and that which is per se, I. Substance is prior in nature to the relative, for the latter is like an offshoot and accident of being, so that there could not be a common idea set over all these goods. Further, since good has as many senses as being, for it is predicated both in the category of substance, as of God, and of reason, and in quality, I. Of the virtues and in quantity, I. Of that which is moderate and in relation, I. Of the useful and in time, I. Of the right opportunity and in place, I. Of the right locality and the like. Clearly it cannot be something universally present in all cases and single, for then it could not have been predicated in all the categories, but in one only. Further, since of the things answering to one idea there is one science, there would have been one science of all the goods, but as it is there are many sciences even of the things that fall under one category, e. of opportunity, for opportunity in war is studied by strategics, and in disease by medicine, and the moderate in food is studied by medicine, and in exercise by the science of gymnastics. And one might ask the question, what in the world they mean by a thing itself is as is the case in man himself, and in a particular man the account of man is one and the same. For in so far as they are man, they will in no respect differ, and if this is so, neither will good itself and particular goods in so far as they are good. But again, it will not be good any the more for being eternal, since that which lasts long is no whiter than that which perishes in a day. The Pythagoreans seem to give a more plausible account of the good, when they place the one in the column of goods, and it is they that Speusippus seems to have followed. Clearly, then, goods must be spoken of in two ways, and some must be good in themselves, the others by reason of these. Let us separate, then, things good in themselves from things useful, and consider whether the former are called good by reference to a single idea. What sort of goods would one call good in themselves? Is it those that are pursued even when isolated from others, such as intelligence, sight, and certain pleasures and honors? Certainly, if we pursue these also for the sake of something else, yet one would place them among things good in themselves. Or is nothing other than the idea of good good in itself? In that case the form will be empty. But if the things we have named are also things good in themselves, the account of the good will have to appear as something identical in them all, as that of whiteness is identical in snow and in white lead. But of honor, wisdom, and pleasure, just in respect of their goodness, the accounts are distinct and diverse. The good, therefore, is not some common element answering to one idea. But what then do we mean by the good? It is surely not like the things that only chance to have the same name. Are goods one, then, by being derived from one good, or by all contributing to one good, or are they rather one by analogy? Certainly as sight is in the body, so is reason in the soul, and so on in other cases. But perhaps these subjects had better be dismissed for the present, for perfect precision about them would be more appropriate to another branch of philosophy. And similarly with regard to the idea, even if there is some one good which is universally predicable of goods, or is capable of separate and independent existence, clearly it could not be achieved or attained by man, but we are now seeking something attainable. Perhaps, however, someone might think it worth while to recognize this with a view to the goods that are attainable and achievable. For having this as a sort of pattern, we shall know better the goods that are good for us, and if we know them shall attain them. This argument has some plausibility, but seems to clash with the procedure of the sciences. For all of these, though they aim at some good and seek to supply the deficiency of it, leave on one side the knowledge of the good. Yet that all the exponents of the arts should be ignorant of, and should not even seek, so great an aid is not probable. It is hard, too, to see how a weaver or a carpenter will be benefited in regard to his own craft by knowing this good itself, or how the man who has viewed the idea itself will be a better doctor or general thereby. For a doctor seems not even to study health in this way, but the health of man, or perhaps rather the health of a particular man. It is individuals that he is healing. But enough of these topics. Summary. Aristotle takes a critical look at the idea of a universal good, particularly challenging Plato's theory of forms, which suggests a perfect, single idea of the good exists that makes all good things good. He finds this idea problematic because good means different things in different contexts, like quality virtues, quantity moderation, or relation usefulness, and there's no single science that covers all these goods. For example, doctors study health and generals study strategy, not some abstract good. Aristotle argues that goods can be divided into those valued for themselves, like wisdom or certain pleasures, and those useful for achieving other things, like tools. He questions whether there's one universal good that ties everything together, or if goods are connected by analogy, like how sight is good for the body and reason for the soul. Since his focus is on practical, achievable goods for human life, he doubts the usefulness of an abstract, eternal good for everyday tasks like weaving or healing. Instead, he wants to focus on what happiness means in a practical sense, setting aside complex philosophical debates for another time and emphasizing goods that people can actually attain and use to live well. Book 1, Chapter 7. Let us again return to the good we are seeking and ask what it can be. It seems different in different actions and arts. It is different in medicine, in strategy, and in the other arts likewise. What then is the good of each? Surely that for whose sake everything else is done. In medicine, this is health; in strategy, victory; in architecture, a house; in any other sphere, something else; and in every action and pursuit, the end. For it is for the sake of this that all men do whatever else they do. Therefore, if there is an end for all that we do, this will be the good achievable by action, and if there are more than one, these will be the goods achievable by action. So the argument has by a different course reached the same point, but we must try to state this even more clearly. Since there are evidently more than one end, and we choose some of these wealth, flutes, and in general instruments for the sake of something else, clearly not all ends are final ends, but the chief good is evidently something final. Therefore, if there is only one final end, this will be what we are seeking, and if there are more than one, the most final of these will be what we are seeking. Now we call that which is in itself worthy of pursuit more final than that which is worthy of pursuit for the sake of something else, and that which is never desirable for the sake of something else more final than the things that are desirable both in themselves and for the sake of that other thing. And therefore we call final without qualification that which is always desirable in itself, and never for the sake of something else. Now such a thing, happiness, above all else, is held to be. For this we choose always for itself and never for the sake of something else, but honor, pleasure, reason, and every virtue we choose indeed for themselves, for if nothing resulted from them we should still choose each of them. But we choose them also for the sake of happiness, judging that by means of them we shall be happy. Happiness, on the other hand, no one chooses for the sake of these, nor, in general, for anything other than itself. From the point of view of self-sufficiency, the same result seems to follow, for the final good is thought to be self-sufficient. Now by self-sufficient we do not mean that which is sufficient for a man by himself, for one who lives a solitary life, but also for parents, children, wife, and in general for his friends and fellow citizens, since man is born for citizenship. But some limit must be set to this, for if we extend our requirement to ancestors and descendants and friends, we are in for an infinite series. Happiness, then, is something final and self-sufficient, and is the end of action. Presumably, however, to say that happiness is the chief good seems a platitude, and a clearer account of what it is still desired. This might perhaps be given, if we could first ascertain the function of man. For just as for a flute player, a sculptor or an artist, and, in general, for all things that have a function or activity. The good and the well is thought to reside in the function. So would it seem to be for man if he has a function. Have the carpenter, then, and the tanner certain functions or activities, and has man none? Is he born without a function? Or as eye, hand, foot, and in general each of the parts evidently has a function, may one lay it down that man similarly has a function apart from all these? What then can this be? Life seems to be common even to plants, but we are seeking what is peculiar to man. Let us exclude, therefore, the life of nutrition and growth. Next there would be a life of perception, but it also seems to be common even to the horse, the ox, and every animal. There remains, then, an active life of the element that has a rational principle. Of this, one part has such a principle in the sense of being obedient to one, the other in the sense of possessing one and exercising thought. And, as life of the rational element also has two meanings, we must state that life in the sense of activity is what we mean, for this seems to be the more proper sense of the term. Now, if the function of man is an activity of soul which follows or implies a rational principle, and if we say so-and-so and a good so-and-so have a function which is the same in kind, but we must add in a complete life. For one swallow does not make a summer, nor does one day, and so too one day or a short time does not make a man blessed and happy. Let this serve as an outline of the good, for we must presumably first sketch it roughly, and then later fill in the details. But it would seem that anyone is capable of carrying on and articulating what has once been well outlined, and that time is a good discoverer or partner in such a work, to which facts the advances of the arts are due, for anyone can add what is lacking. And we must also remember what has been said before, and not look for precision in all things alike, but in each class of things such precision as accords with the subject matter, and so much as is appropriate to the inquiry. For a carpenter and a geometer investigate the right angle in different ways. The former does so in so far as the right angle is useful for his work, while the latter inquires what it is or what sort of thing it is, for he is a spectator of the truth. We must act in the same way, then, in all other matters as well, that our main task may not be subordinated to minor questions. Nor must we demand the cause in all matters alike. It is enough in some cases that the fact be well established, as in the case of the first principles. The fact is the primary thing or first principle. Now of first principles we see some by induction, some by perception, some by a certain habituation, and others too in other ways. But each set of principles we must try to investigate in the natural way, and we must take pains to state them definitely, since they have a great influence on what follows. For the beginning is thought to be more than half of the whole, and many of the questions we ask are cleared up by it. Summary: Aristotle dives deeper into defining the ultimate good, which he identifies as happiness, the one thing we pursue for its own sake and not for something else. He explains that while things like wealth or tools are means to an end, happiness is the final goal, the end of all our actions. It's self-sufficient, meaning it makes life complete and desirable on its own, not just for one person but also for their family and community, since humans are naturally social. To understand happiness better, Aristotle suggests looking at what makes humans unique, which he calls our function. Just as a flute player's function is to play music well, a human's function is to live a life guided by reason, since reason sets us apart from plants which just grow and animals which have senses. The good life, then, is about actively using our reason to act virtuously, doing the right things excellently. Happiness isn't just a moment of joy but requires a full life of consistent virtuous actions, because one good day doesn't make you truly happy any more than one sunny day makes a summer. He reminds us not to expect exact answers in this study, as human life isn't as precise as math, and we should focus on practical truths that help us live well, using experience and reason as our starting points. Book 1, Chapter 8. We must consider it, however, in the light not only of our conclusion and our premises, but also of what is commonly said about it. For with a true view all the data harmonize, but with a false one the facts soon clash. Now goods have been divided into three classes, and some are described as external, others as relating to soul or to body. We call those that relate to soul most properly and truly goods, and psychical actions and activities we class as relating to soul. Therefore our account must be sound, at least according to this view, which is an old one and agreed on by philosophers. It is correct also in that we identify the end with certain actions and activities, for thus it falls among goods of the soul and not among external goods. Another belief which harmonizes with our account is that the happy man lives well and does well, for we have practically defined happiness as a sort of good life and good action. The characteristics that are looked for in happiness seem also, all of them, to belong to what we have defined happiness as being. For some identify happiness with virtue, some with practical wisdom, others with a kind of philosophic wisdom, others with these or one of these, accompanied by pleasure or not without pleasure, while others include also external prosperity. With those who identify happiness with virtue, or someone virtue, our account is in harmony, for to virtue belongs virtuous activity. But it makes, perhaps, no small difference whether we place the chief good in possession or in use, in state of mind or in activity. For the state of mind may exist without producing any good result, as in a man who is asleep or in some other way quite inactive, but the activity cannot. For one who has the activity will of necessity be acting, and acting well. And as in the Olympic Games, it is not the most beautiful and the strongest that are crowned, but those who compete for it is some of these that are victorious. So those who act win, and rightly win, the noble and good things in life. Their life is also in itself pleasant. For pleasure is a state of soul, and to each man that which he is said to be a lover of is pleasant. Not only is a horse pleasant to the lover of horses, and a spectacle to the lover of sights, but also in the same way just acts are pleasant to the lover of justice, and in general virtuous acts to the lover of virtue. Now for most men their pleasures are in conflict with one another, because these are not by nature pleasant. But the lovers of what is noble find pleasant the things that are by nature pleasant, and virtuous actions are such, so that these are pleasant for such men as well as in their own nature. Their life, therefore, has no further need of pleasure as a sort of adventitious charm, but has its pleasure in itself. For, besides what we have said, the man who does not rejoice in noble actions is not even good, since no one would call a man just who did not enjoy acting justly, nor any man liberal who did not enjoy liberal actions, and similarly in all other cases. If this is so, virtuous actions must be in themselves pleasant. But they are also good and noble, and have each of these attributes in the highest degree, since the good man judges well about these attributes. His judgment is such as we have described. Happiness, then, is the best, noblest, and most pleasant thing in the world, and these attributes are not severed as in the inscription at Delos: most noble is that which is justest, and best is health, but pleasantest is it to win what we love. For all these properties belong to the best activities, and these, or one the best of these, we identify with happiness. Yet evidently, as we said, it needs the external goods as well, for it is impossible or not easy to do noble acts without the proper equipment. As we said then, Happiness seems to need this sort of prosperity in addition, for which reason some identify happiness with good fortune, though others identify it with virtue. Summary: Aristotle checks his definition of happiness virtuous activity of the soul against common beliefs to see if it holds up. He notes that goods are split into three types: external like wealth, bodily like health, and those of the soul like virtues, with soul-related goods being the most important. His idea that happiness comes from active, virtuous deeds fits with the old philosophical view that living well means acting well. People have different ideas about happiness. Some say it's virtue, some say wisdom, some add pleasure or wealth, but Aristotle thinks they're all partly right. His definition aligns with those who see happiness as tied to virtue, but he stresses it's not just having virtue, like a sleeping person might, but using it actively, like an athlete winning by competing, not just being strong. He also argues that virtuous actions are naturally pleasant for good people, like how a just person enjoys doing just things. So happiness includes pleasure without needing extra perks. Happiness, then, is the best, noblest, and most pleasant thing, combining all these qualities. However, it also needs external things like friends, money, or status to make noble actions possible, as it's hard to be happy if you're alone, poor, or surrounded by bad people. Some see happiness as luck, others as virtue, but Aristotle says it's both: virtuous activity supported by enough external goods to live well. Book 1, Chapter 9. For this reason also the question is asked, whether happiness is to be acquired by learning or by habituation or some other sort of training, or comes in virtue of some divine providence or again by chance. Now, if there is any gift of the gods to men, it is reasonable that happiness should be God-given, and most surely God-given of all human things inasmuch as it is the best. But this question would perhaps be more appropriate to another inquiry. Happiness seems, however, even if it is not God-sent but comes as a result of virtue and some process of learning or training, to be among the most godlike things. For that which is the prize and end of virtue seems to be the best thing in the world and something godlike and blessed. It will also on this view be very generally shared, for all who are not maimed as regards their potentiality for virtue may win it by a certain kind of study and care. But if it is better to be happy thus than by chance, it is reasonable that the facts should be so, since everything that depends on the action of nature is by nature as good as it can be, and similarly everything that depends on art or any rational cause, and especially if it depends on the best of all causes. To entrust to chance what is greatest and most noble would be a very defective arrangement. The answer to the question we are asking is plain also from the definition of happiness, for it has been said to be a virtuous activity of soul, of a certain kind. Of the remaining goods, some must necessarily pre-exist as conditions of happiness, and others are naturally cooperative and useful as instruments. And this will be found to agree with what we said at the outset, for we stated the end of political science to be the best end, and political science spends most of its pains on making the citizens to be of a certain character, viz., good and capable of noble acts. It is natural, then, that we call neither ox nor horse nor any other of the animals happy, for none of them is capable of sharing in such activity. For this reason also a boy is not happy, for he is not yet capable of such acts, owing to his age, and boys who are called happy are being congratulated by reason of the hopes we have for them. Summary: Aristotle tackles the question of how we achieve happiness, wondering if it comes from learning, building good habits, some other training, a gift from the gods, or just luck. He leans toward happiness being something we earn through virtue and effort, like studying or practicing good behavior, rather than relying on chance, because leaving the best thing in life to luck doesn't make sense. Since he defines happiness as the soul's virtuous activity, it's something humans can work toward if they have the potential for virtue and put in the effort. Political science, he says, aims to help people become good citizens who do noble things, which aligns with this idea of happiness. Animals can't be happy because they don't have the rational ability to act virtuously, and young children aren't happy in this sense either, as they're too young to perform such actions when we call them happy. We're just hopeful for their future. Happiness also requires a full life, not just a moment, because life is full of ups and downs, and even the luckiest person, like Priam from Greek stories, can end up miserable if bad things happen later. So, happiness comes from consistently living virtuously over a lifetime, with enough external support like resources or friends to make those good actions possible. Book 1, Chapter 10. Must no one at all then be called happy while he lives? Must we, as Solon says, see the end? Even if we are to lay down this doctrine, is it also the case that a man is happy when he is dead? Or is not this quite absurd, especially for us who say that happiness is an activity? But if we do not call the dead man happy, and if Solon does not mean this, but that one can then safely call a man blessed as being at last beyond evils and misfortunes, this also affords matter for discussion. For both evil and good are thought to exist for a dead man, as much as for one who is alive but not aware of them. Honors and dishonors and the good or bad fortunes of children, and in general of descendants. And this also presents a problem. For though a man has lived happily up to old age and has had a death worthy of his life, many reverses may befall his descendants. Some of them may be good and attain the life they deserve, while with others the opposite may be the case. And clearly, too, the degrees of relationship between them and their ancestors may vary indefinitely. It would be odd, then, if the dead man were to share in these changes and become at one time happy, at another wretched, while it would also be odd if the fortunes of the descendants did not for some time have some effect on the happiness of their ancestors. But we must return to our first difficulty, for perhaps by a consideration of it our present problem might be solved. For clearly, if we were to keep pace with his fortunes, we should often call the same man happy and again wretched, making the happy man out to be chameleon and insecurely based. Or is this keeping pace with his fortunes quite wrong? Success or failure in life does not depend on these, but human life, as we said, needs these as mere additions, while virtuous activities or their opposites are what constitute happiness or the reverse. The question we have now discussed confirms our definition. When then should we not say that he is happy who is active in accordance with complete virtue, and is sufficiently equipped with external goods, not for some chance period but throughout a complete life? Or must we add, and who is destined to live thus and die as befits his life? Certainly the future is obscure to us, while happiness, we claim, is an end and something in every way final. If so, we shall call happy those among living men in whom these conditions are, and are to be, fulfilled but happy men. So much for these questions. Summary: Aristotle grapples with whether we can call someone happy while they are alive or only after they die, as the philosopher Solon suggested, since life is unpredictable and fortunes can change. He finds it odd to say a dead person is happy, since happiness is about active virtuous deeds, not a state you can have when you're gone. But he also thinks it's wrong to avoid calling someone happy while alive, just because bad things might happen later that would make happiness too unstable, like a chameleon changing colors. Instead, he says happiness is steady because it comes from virtuous activities, which are the most lasting part of human life, more so than knowledge or wealth. A truly good person stays happy by acting nobly, even through tough times, like a skilled craftsman making the best of what they have. While big misfortunes, like those faced by Priam in Greek stories, can dim happiness by limiting actions, they don't destroy it completely if the person remains virtuous. Happiness, then, is about living a full life of virtue with enough external support like friends or resources to keep going, and we can call someone happy if they consistently live this way, even if the future is uncertain. Book 1, Chapter 11. For it seems from these considerations that even if anything whether good or evil penetrates to them, it must be something weak and negligible, either in itself or for them, or if not, at least it must be such in degree and kind as not to make happy those who are not happy nor to take away their blessedness from those who are. The good or bad fortunes of friends, then, seem to have some effects on the dead, but effects of such a kind and degree as neither to make the happy unhappy, nor to produce any other change of the kind. Summary: Aristotle considers whether the happiness of someone's friends or descendants affects their own happiness, especially after death, which seems like a cold idea to dismiss since people care deeply about their loved ones. He acknowledges that events like a friend's misfortune or a descendant's success do matter to us, more so if they're close to us, like family, than distant connections. However, he argues that for the dead, these events have only a small impact, if any, because happiness is about active virtue, not just what happens to others. For the living, a friend's bad luck might weigh on you, but it doesn't change your core happiness, which comes from your own virtuous actions. For example, if your child fails or succeeds, it might affect you emotionally, but it doesn't make or break your happiness unless it stops you from acting virtuously. Aristotle concludes that while loved ones' fortunes can influence how we feel, they don't fundamentally alter our happiness, which is rooted in our own good deeds over a lifetime, not in external events beyond our control. Book 1, Chapter 12. These questions having been definitely answered, let us consider whether happiness is among the things that are praised or rather among the things that are prized, for clearly it is not to be placed among potentialities. This is clear also from the praises of the gods, for it seems absurd that the gods should be referred to our standard, but this is done because praise involves a reference to something else. But if praise is for things such as we have described, clearly what applies to the best things is not praise, but something greater and better, as is indeed obvious. For what we do to the gods and the most godlike of men is to call them blessed and happy. And so too with good things. No one praises happiness as he does justice, but rather calls it blessed, as being something more divine and better. Eudoxus also seems to have been right in his method of advocating the supremacy of pleasure. He thought that the fact that, though a good, it is not praised indicated it to be better than the things that are praised, and that this is what God and the good are. For by reference to these, all other things are judged. Praise is appropriate to virtue, for as a result of virtue, men tend to do noble deeds, but encomia are bestowed on acts, whether of the body or of the soul. But perhaps nicety in these matters is more proper to those who have made a study of encomia. To us it is clear from what has been said that happiness is among the things that are prized and perfect. It seems to be so also from the fact that it is a first principle, for it is for the sake of this that we all do all that we do, and the first principle and cause of goods is, we claim, something prized and divine. Summary: Aristotle asks whether happiness is something we praise, like we praise someone for being brave, or something we prize, meaning it's valued as the ultimate goal. He explains that we praise things like courage or strength, because they lead to good actions or outcomes. But happiness is different. It's not just a step toward something else, but the final, perfect thing we all aim for. It's like how we call gods or the best people blessed, not just good, because happiness is divine and complete. He agrees with the philosopher Eudoxus, who said pleasure is special because it's not praised like virtues but valued for itself, though Aristotle thinks happiness is even higher than pleasure. Happiness is the starting point for why we do everything, the ultimate reason behind all our actions, making it something prized, not just praised. It's not about having the potential to be good, but actually living and acting in a way that's virtuous, making happiness the most desirable and godlike goal we can achieve in life. Book 1, Chapter 13. Since happiness is an activity of soul in accordance with perfect virtue, we must consider the nature of virtue, for perhaps we shall thus see better the nature of happiness. The true student of politics, too, is thought to have studied virtue above all things, for he wishes to make his fellow citizens good and obedient to the laws. As an example of this, we have the lawgivers of the Cretans and the Spartans, and any others of the kind that there may have been. And if this inquiry belongs to political science, clearly the pursuit of it will be in accordance with our original plan. But clearly the virtue we must study is human virtue, for the good we were seeking was human good and the happiness human happiness. By human virtue, we mean not that of the body but that of the soul, and happiness also we call an activity of soul. But if this is so, clearly the student of politics must know something about the soul, as the man who is to heal the eyes or the body as a whole must know about the eyes or the body, and all the more since politics is more prized and better than medicine. But even among doctors, the best educated spend much labor on acquiring knowledge of the body. The student of politics, then, must study the soul, and must study it with these objects in view, and do so just to the extent which is sufficient for the questions we are discussing. For further precision is perhaps something more laborious than our purposes require. Some things are said about it, adequately enough even in the discussions outside our school, and we must use these. That one element in the soul is irrational, and one has a rational principle. Whether these are separated as the parts of the body or of anything divisible or are distinct by definition but by nature inseparable, like convex and concave in the circumference of a circle, does not affect the present question. Of the irrational element, one division seems to be widely distributed, and vegetative in its nature. I mean that which causes nutrition and growth. For it is this kind of power of the soul that one must assign to all nurslings and to embryos, and this same power to full-grown creatures. This is more reasonable than to assign some different power to them. Enough of this subject, however. Let us leave the nutritive faculty alone, since it has by its nature no share in human excellence. There seems to be also another irrational element in the soul, one which in a sense, however, shares in a rational principle. For we praise the rational principle of the continent man and of the incontinent, and the part of their soul that has such a principle, since it urges them aright and towards the best objects. But there is found in them also another element naturally opposed to the rational principle, which fights against and resists that principle. For exactly as paralyzed limbs when we intend to move them to the right turn on the contrary to the left, so is it with the soul. The impulses of incontinent people move in contrary directions. But while in the body we see that which moves astray, in the soul we do not. No doubt, however, we must none the less suppose that in the soul too there is something contrary to the rational principle, resisting and opposing it. In what sense it is distinct from the other elements does not concern us. Now even this seems to have a share in a rational principle, as we said. At any rate in the continent man it obeys the rational principle, and presumably in the temperate and brave man it is still more obedient. For in him it speaks, on all matters with the same voice as the rational principle. Therefore, the irrational element also appears to be twofold. For the vegetative element in no way shares in a rational principle, but the appetitive and in general the desiring element in a sense shares in it, in so far as it listens to and obeys it. This is the sense in which we speak of taking account of one's father or one's friends, not that in which we speak of accounting for a mathematical property. That the irrational element is in some sense persuaded by a rational principle is indicated also by the giving of advice and by all reproof and exhortation. And if this element also must be said to have a rational principle, that which has a rational principle as well as that which has not will be twofold, one subdivision having it in the strict sense and in itself, and the other having a tendency to obey as one does one's father. Virtue, too, is distinguished into kinds in accordance with this difference. For we say that some of the virtues are intellectual, and others moral, philosophic wisdom and understanding and practical wisdom being intellectual, liberality and temperance moral. For in speaking about a man's character, we do not say that he is wise or has understanding, but that he is good-tempered or temperate. Yet we praise the wise man also with respect to his state of mind, and of states of mind we call those which merit praise virtues. Summary: Aristotle ties happiness to virtue, saying that to understand happiness better, we need to look at what virtue is, since happiness is about the soul acting perfectly virtuously. Political science, which aims to make citizens good and law-abiding like the famous lawgivers of Crete and Sparta, focuses on human virtue, specifically of the soul, not the body. To study this, we need to know about the soul, just like a doctor needs to know about the body to heal it. Aristotle describes the soul as having two parts: a rational part that thinks and makes decisions, and an irrational part that includes basic functions like growth, which plants and animals have, and desires or emotions. The growth part doesn't contribute to human goodness, but the desiring part can follow reason, like how a well-behaved person listens to good advice. For example, a brave person's desires align with their rational choice to act courageously. Virtues come in two types: intellectual ones like wisdom and moral ones like generosity or self-control. Happiness comes from actively using these virtues, guided by reason, to live a good life, which is why political science cares about shaping people's characters to be virtuous.